Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells. Welcome back, Spookaroos. It's been a big week. As I said last time you listened to the show, that I would have a big surprise for you if you went to the website. And if you did that, or if you follow the page on Facebook, you know that the surprise was that I have created a design with some help. It wasn't me alone. And this design is now available on t-shirts and stickers and tote bags. It is a skeleton, and he is reading a book that says Memento Mori. Consult your Google machine if you don't know what that means. And he's reading a book, and he's standing in front of what I would describe as a dungeon wall, enclosed in a circle, and the circle says, True Blue Spookaroo. So that's for all you spookaroos out there. Oh, and also in the circle are some palm fronds, which are a symbol in cemeteries of victory over death. So that's why those are on there. And that's a little fun fact for you. So the way that design came about, I did come up with the concept for the design, and I drew it out and everything, but then I went online and acquired the services of an actual artist to flesh out my idea, my simple sketch. I'll post it on Instagram and on Facebook so you guys can see how bad it, where it came from. But again, this was just a sketch I was given to give the artist an idea of what I was going for, so I didn't have to use a bunch of words with somebody and just ramble on and get confusing, as I tend to do, like I'm doing right now. So this way he could just see what I was talking about, kind of, and go from there. And I made it quite clear in my emails back and forth with this person that I expected that the finished project would have the same shape as what I was sending him, but look completely different. And thankfully, that's what we got. So if you want to have a good laugh at my childish drawing, you'll be able to find it on the website and Instagram and Facebook. So speaking of that, let's just get right to that part of the show. I just mentioned the website. The website is spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the exact same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can check out each and every episode of the show, even the ones no longer available on iTunes and perhaps some other podcasting sites. They do take them away as we progress and make new episodes sometimes. But they all live on the website, and you can find them all there. You can also sometimes find outtakes and YouTube videos and that kind of thing. You can sometimes find pictures. You can also find links to all of our social media. We are at Spooky Ass Shit on both Twitter and Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. We also have a closed group if you want to get really deep into dark subjects. That is the Spookaroos. So you can search for Spookaroos on Facebook and join us there. And of course, on the website now, we also have a store. Go to the website. Up near the top, you will see over on the, well, it's kind of in the middle, but it's on the right side of all the tabs. You will see the store tab. And that will take you to TeePublic, which is how we are producing these shirts. And you can shop until your heart's content. And a big thank you to everybody who has bought something from the store. I don't know if you guys know how TeePublic works, but basically you upload a design and then they create everything for you. And you basically just get like a small percentage. So for the shirts or whatever, I personally might get $2 to $4 depending on what price they set them at and if there's a sale or not per shirt. And, they charge $20 or whatever. And out of that $20, they give me, like I said, $2 to $4, and then they keep the rest. So it's not a big, huge money-making venture considering the size of the audience that I have. But you guys have been asking for merchandise, and I love that you want to support the show in that way, and that you are proud to listen to the show, and that you want to wear something that reflects that. So I said, well, let me go ahead and do this just for the fans, for the Spookaroos, so that you guys will be able to identify each other on the rare chance that you do meet in the wild, and you'll know, hey, that's a cool person. So a huge thank you to you if you have purchased something already. Your support means the world. Okay, with all that jibber jabber out of the way, let's get right to it. Tonight, we are going to be talking about Gremlins, Goblins, and Hobgoblins, and the differences between all of those things. Now, I don't remember exactly what inspired me to start looking this up, but while I was researching it, it did make me think of the episode that I did a long time ago for St. Patrick's Day. I think it was in the first season, so this would have been a March 2016 episode. And it was all about Irish mythology, including the leprechaun and some of the wee folk and the fairy people. And this I found very interesting, but it's actually one of the lowest rated episodes in number of downloads. Libsyn, the hosting site for this and pretty much every other podcast, they will tell you the number of downloads you get, but they keep changing the algorithm, so it's kind of hard to get a real sense of what's actually the most popular and least popular episodes. But I know for a long time this St. Patrick's Day episode was the least popular, and I hope that it has more to do with the fact that it was kind of holiday-based and less that people weren't interested in the subject, because I find it a really interesting subject, and I kind of feel like this gremlin and goblin thing kind of would be a good companion to that episode, which is great if you're a fan of that episode, but a lot of you didn't download it, so maybe this is a really big mistake, but I still find it interesting, so we're going to dive into it. I don't know if you can hear it, but it is a snowy night here in the Northeast, and they are shoveling like mad out in the street. They just started now. I'm going to pause this recording and see if the microphone is picking that up. Okay, I don't hear it on my speakers, so I'm thinking we can continue with this show. Now, I could have just cut all that out, but I wanted to give you a little slice of life from living in the Northeast if you're not in a snowy area. This is what happens. It gets very loud outside. You just hear scraping, scraping, scraping on the pavement as they shovel. But I'm glad they are shoveling. Hopefully we won't have icy patches like we did last year when I broke my damn ankle. Okay, so we're going to talk about gremlins, goblins, and hobgoblins because I was wondering, what is the difference between these creatures? I kind of considered them more or less one and the same kind of thing. What's a gremlin? What's a goblin? What's a hobgoblin? Well, tonight, my friends, I'm going to answer those questions for you. We're going to begin with gremlins. Now, you might be surprised to learn, as I was, that gremlins are actually a modern myth. Gremlins are only about 100 years old, as far as we can tell anyway. A gremlin is supposed to be a mischievous creature that causes malfunctions in aircraft and other machinery. It doesn't have to be in the air, but that is where the mythology started. We'll get to that in a second. Descriptions can vary on what these creatures look like, but most descriptions include large eyes and small bodies, and that they stand only about a foot or two in height. They are also often reported to have sharp teeth and claws. The term gremlin originated in the 1920s with the British Royal Air Force, where it became a slang word used to excuse otherwise inexplicable mechanical failure on board aircrafts. Why did the compass say that we were going north when we very clearly were going east? I don't know. Must have been a gremlin messing with it. In general, gremlins were not taken seriously. It was kind of a joke. Like when strange things happen and someone says, "Was it a full moon last night?" The earliest recorded printed use of the word gremlin comes from a poem published in the trade journal Aeroplane in Malta on April 10th, 1929. Another early reference to gremlins comes to us from the pilot Paul Gower, who wrote a novel in 1938 entitled The ATA, Women with Wings, where Scotland was described as, quote, gremlin country, a mystical and rugged territory where scissor-wielding gremlins would cut the wires in the plane's engines. The concept of gremlins was further popularized during World War II among the airmen of the UK's Royal Air Force units. During the war, gremlins were thought to have Nazi sympathies, since they were seemingly only attacking British planes. But later investigations revealed that enemy planes had suffered similar and equally inexplicable mechanical problems. So, it seems that the Gremlins were equal opportunity tricksters. They care not for the matters of mankind. They perform their acts of mischief for their own satisfaction. Still, some airmen took the myth more seriously than others. Air servicemen sometimes claimed that they did actually see gremlins tinkering with their equipment. One crewman swore he saw one before an engine malfunction that caused his bomber to rapidly lose altitude, forcing the aircraft to return to base. Another former airman described a time when he found a, quote, parted cable, which bore obvious tooth marks in spite of the fact that the break occurred in a most inaccessible part of the plane. At this point, the airman states he heard a gruff voice demand,
"How many times must you be told to obey orders and not tackle jobs you aren't qualified for? This is how it should be done."
Upon which he heard a, quote, musical twang, and another cable had been severed. So, if gremlins aren't real, what could these otherwise serious and sober men be seeing? Well, a skeptic might point out that the combination of the stress of combat and the dizzying heights cause hallucinations, which could include little men messing with the machinery on a plane. Psychiatrists might say these gremlins are nothing but a coping mechanism of the mind to help explain the many problems aircraft can face while in combat. In reality, gremlins were more likely just a form of, quote, passing the buck or deflecting blame. Author Roald Dahl is credited with helping the term gremlin become known outside the Royal Air Force. Now, I have a problem with that name. You might have noticed. I realized I don't think I've ever heard his name spoken out loud. I've only ever seen it in writing. Is it Roald Dahl? Roald Dahl? Well, anyway, Mr. Dahl, how about that? Creator of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka, The Witches, of course, James and the Giant Peach, and many more. Anyway, Mr. Dahl, he was familiar with the myth because he had carried out his own military service in the Royal Air Force in the Middle East. Dahl had had his own experience in an accidental crash landing in the Western Desert, but in January of 1942, he was transferred to Washington, D.C. as an assistant air attaché at the British Embassy. It was there that he wrote his very first children's novel, The Gremlins, in which the Gremlins were tiny men who lived on Royal Air Force fighters. You know, my grandfather was in the Royal Air Force right around this time. He served in both World Wars, if family history is to be believed, and actually he served for England in World War I, and he served for the United States in World War II. I can confirm that he was in the Army of the United States during World War II. And again, if family history is to be believed, he was also in the Air Force during World War I over in England. I wonder if he would have had any accounts of gremlins to share with me. He passed away long before I was born, unfortunately, so I never got to know the man. But that would be something I'd be asking him right now if I had the opportunity. Well, of course, the myth of the gremlin did spread from outside of the Air Force, and it's caught on like wildfire. Just a few examples here of it popping up in pop culture. There are many, but we are just going to highlight just a few. Of course, a 1963 episode of The Twilight Zone, known as Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, directed by Richard Donner and based on a short story of the same name by Richard Matheson, featured a gremlin attacking an airliner, exactly what gremlins are supposed to do. Except, in the episode, the gremlin appears as a large, kind of mossy looking, I guess is how you'd call it. Like, it looks like he's got moss all over him. Kind of a large, mossy, ape-like creature, which begins to damage the wing. Now, this is not what a gremlin typically is said to look like, but still, same idea. It's a creature on an airplane, attacking the airplane. Now, this time he's literally on the plane, not the old George Carlin joke of, I'm not going to ride on the plane, fuck you, I'm getting in the plane. No, he's on the wing of the plane and he's damaging the wing. Now, William Shatner plays a passenger. Yeah, William Shatner, Star Trek. He plays a passenger who sees the gremlin on the aircraft's wing, and he tries to warn the stewardess and the other airplane staff members and passengers about it, but no one else is able to see the creature. Every time they look out the window, there's nothing there. And sometimes Shatner looks out, he sees nothing. Sometimes he looks out and he sees this gremlin. Shatner tries to convince himself that what he's seeing isn't really there, but every time he looks out the window... Now, I don't want to ruin the ending for you in case you haven't seen the episode, but it's a very good episode. It's iconic, obviously, and it's definitely worth looking up. It is available on streaming services. I believe it's on Amazon, and it might be on other ones too. I'm not sure. Anyway, that episode inspired a segment in the infamous Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. The segment aired during the 1993 edition of the yearly Halloween special. The segment is titled Terror at 5.5 Feet, and it essentially follows the same plot as the Twilight Zone episode, except instead of attacking Shatner's plane, this gremlin, with its voice provided by Frank Welker of Scooby-Doo fame, originally Golden Boy Fred, but also now the voice of Scooby-Doo himself, this gremlin attempts to destroy the wheel of Bart Simpson's bus. Now, this gremlin looks much more like a traditional image of a gremlin as opposed to the Twilight Zone Mossy Ape character. And, of course, to round out Gremlins, we have the movies from the 80s. The 1984 movie Gremlins, produced by Steven Spielberg and directed by Joe Dante, is loosely inspired by Mr. Doll's characters, featuring evil and destructive monsters which mutate from small, cute, furry, adorable, lovable creatures. Now, if you've seen the movie Gremlins, and I'm sure that most of you have, you know that they are mogwai, right? Before they turn into gremlins, and there's certain rules. You can't get them wet, you can't feed them after midnight, bright light, all this kind of stuff can transform them, right? Well, this was a hit movie around the world, and of course in my house. You longtime listeners have met my brother Dan, who is 6 years older than me, and as I might have mentioned on the episode that Dan guested on, he was without a doubt Mom's favorite. Now, why exactly, I don't know, but he was Mom's favorite, for sure. And an example of this, like I said, Gremlins was a big hit movie, and Gizmo, the little furry cute one, that was the hippest thing to have. Okay, everybody wanted the stuffed animal of Gizmo. Well, for Christmas one year, my brother and I got Gremlins toys. Guess who got Gizmo? Now, I'm not complaining too much, actually, because I got Spike. And now I would love to have a Spike figure. I would love to have a Spike figure way more than I would want a Gizmo figure. So maybe my mom just knew future me a little bit better than, or she predicted future me, I should say, I guess. But at the time, I was just a little kid. 1984, so probably 85 is when we got the toys, so I would have been about 4 years old, so Spike might have been a little bit intense for me, but I wanted Gizmo, and I got Spike. And even then, I was like, wait, how come he gets the good one? So I knew from early on how this game was going. And it didn't get any better. It only got worse as time went on. But that's okay. And of course, Gremlins was such a hit that it spawned a sequel, Gremlins 2, the new batch, which came out in 1990. I would love to share a story about that one with you, but I distinctly remember that we were supposed to go see it, and we canceled our plans to see it in the movie theater because my sister had to work that night, and my mom said, don't worry, we'll go see it once your sister doesn't have to work. And guess what? Never saw it in the movie theater. I'm sure that I did. I know I did see it on VHS at some point, but I don't have any strong memories of it exactly. But I do distinctly remember being disappointed that we couldn't go see it because my sister had to work and we were going to wait for a weekend where she wasn't working and then we would go. But by the time she was ready, it was out of theaters. I'm angry with my siblings tonight. That concludes part 1 of this episode. That is all I have to say about Gremlins. But you might be wondering, okay, in that case, that's a gremlin. What, then, is a goblin? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's get into our talk about goblins. A goblin is a monstrous creature from European folklore. It was first recorded sometime prior to 1141. That's the best date that I can find. Sometime prior to 1141. The reason I say that is because around that year, a manuscript was written which described how a goblin had been haunting Normandy in France. Not exactly a set description as to what a goblin looks like or what their powers are, because the descriptions tend to change from story to story and country to country. That said, they are almost always described as small and grotesque, mischievous or outright malicious, and greedy, especially for gold and jewelry. They are also often reported as having magical powers, not unlike a fairy or, depending on some stories, a demon. Most commonly, they are said to look essentially like very small humans, similar in appearance to a typical garden gnome, though perhaps with a slightly more sinister-looking face. They are spirits of the earth, like fairies, pixies, and elves, but, unlike these other spirits, they are usually malicious. Goblins came from France, and then spread all over Europe, sailing to Britain on Viking ships, according to the mythology anyway. French mothers used to threaten their naughty children that the goblin will take you away. Stealing children is one of the most well-known and nastiest tricks that the goblins will play on you. However, they are known to be slightly less malicious. They might just do something like knock over your pails of milk or blow soot out of your chimney and into your home, that kind of thing. Of course, as far as pop culture goes, I think probably the goblin that we are most familiar with is the Goblin King from the movie Labyrinth. Now, this Goblin King was played by David Bowie, and he looks nothing like the traditional goblin. However, his underlings, his kingdom, they do appear to be regular old goblins, and they are baby snatchers. Of course, in the movie, she wishes for them to take the baby away, and then she is surprised when they do, in fact, take your baby. So I think an important distinction between the goblins and the gremlins, it seems like gremlins, they mess with things, but they aren't really doing it necessarily to mess with people. That's just kind of what they do. Whereas goblins are more intelligent creatures, it seems like, and they have an understanding of what they're doing, and they're doing things to trick you, to make bargains with you, to get things out of you, and to get gold and jewels and that kind of thing. Also, if goblins are members of this fairy family, that would mean that they are from the races that are from before the time of man on Earth. Again, if you go back and listen to the Leprechaun episode from March of 2016, you can find it on the website under March 2016, you'll hear me explain all about the Aesir and all that, and who all these creatures were, and why they were forced out when mankind came around, and why they still sometimes come back. And that would explain why these goblins might be so mad at mankind for kind of taking their place in the world and driving them underground. But what about hobgoblins, you ask? Yes, we're going to talk about hobgoblins too, because that just closes up our talk about goblins. Now we are on to hobgoblins. Now, longtime listeners of the show will know that I actually have my very own hobgoblin, and is none other than former frequent co-host, and hopefully the once and future co-host, the woman I call Jenny Blades, although she is now known as Jenny Lassess. That is my personal hobgoblin, for reasons I think I've gone into before. And if I haven't, well, then I guess it just remains a mystery. It seems that the term hobgoblin originally just referred to a rustic countryside living goblin. But some say Hob is actually a nickname for Robert, and this could be a reference to the most famous of all hobgoblins, Robin Goodfellow. Now that is an interesting character, and I'll probably do a whole nother episode about him someday, perhaps, if you guys want to hear it, but I won't go into his full story today. The earliest instance of the word can be traced to about 1530, although it was likely already in use for some time prior to that. Goblins are described as small, hairy little men who are often found living within human dwellings, and they can be asked to do odd jobs around the house while the family sleeps. Such chores often include small tasks like dusting and ironing, and usually the only compensation necessary in return for these favors is a little bit of food. So that's a pretty sweet deal. If you happen to find a hobgoblin, you're very lucky. Jenny Blades, come on over and do some sweeping and vacuuming for me. Hobgoblins are fond of practical magic. Unlike regular goblins, hobgoblins are usually not malicious, although they do tend to become easily annoyed, which can cause them to become mischievous, frightening, and sometimes, yes, even dangerous. Some are also known to be able to shapeshift. If you are lucky enough to find a hobgoblin in your own home, I have some advice for you. Do not, under any circumstances, give them clothing. Giving them clothing will cause them to depart your home forever, though the reason why this is so is not exactly clear. In some stories, they leave because they are offended that the homeowner would suggest that they require a change of clothing. In other stories, they will leave the home because they love their new clothing so much they consider themselves fancy now, and they refuse to work as a servant while wearing their new, fine clothing. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the differences between the gremlin, the goblin, and the hobgoblin. Of course, you might be familiar with the goblins from Marvel comic books, Spider-Man in particular, the Green Goblin, and the Hobgoblin. So now you know. The Hobgoblin is just basically the country bumpkin version of the Green Goblin, according to mythology anyway. In the comic books, I'm actually not too sure. I know more about the Green Goblin than I do about the Hobgoblin. But they are both bad guys in the Spider-Man universe. Or Spider-Verse. That does bring us to the end of the episode, and ladies and gentlemen, I want to point something out. As I've been recording this episode, this one's come out a little bit funny, and I'm sure there's going to be a couple spots that sound a little funny in your ear because of the way I had to put this show together. This is going to sound like I am making a joke, but I swear that this is true. My equipment has been a little bit screwy the entire time I've been recording this thing. I've had to re-record things over and over because the mic just suddenly stopped working, or as I was in the middle of recording, I got a system overload warning, or, all these kind of things. It's happened about 5 or 6 times in the recording of this episode. Coincidence that I'm talking about gremlins and these kinds of things are happening? Yeah, probably. But fun to think about nonetheless. Perhaps there's a little gremlin here in my MacBook Pro. Once again, I want to thank you all for listening. If you're wondering how you can support the show, well, congratulations. You're already doing it just by listening. But if you want to go above and beyond being an awesome listener, if you want to be a true blue spookaroo, there are some things you can do. And those things include leaving a nice review on Apple Podcast. Doing that helps the show get discovered by new people, new spookaroos, and helps to grow the show. And you can also, of course, share the show with people you know, IRL, or even online. That's fine too. Just go ahead and share with anybody you know that happens to be a spooky type person. They'd probably get along very well with all the rest of us here. And of course, You can visit us at spookyas.com and find all of our social media links. We are at SpookyAssShit on both Twitter and on Instagram. And you can purchase products in the store there and through TeePublic. If you go there and search Spookaroo, it'll take you right to the design that we have. And, of course, you can also come and chat with us on Facebook. We are at facebook.com/spookyas. That is the big, large public group where we can say whatever we want, but it will be seen by the public. If you go to the Spookaroo's closed group, that's where you can take the deep dives and talk about your obsessions with serial killers or whatever, and nobody will judge you. I do hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I hope as you go through the week, no gremlins, goblins, or hobgoblins pester you, but if they do, just remember, you can turn a hobgoblin to your favor. Stay away from the gremlins and the regular goblins, though. Until next time, don't be afraid.